Just now, your brains sent a signal to your pupils to dilate, to expand, to allow in more light. Near the center of the eye is the iris. That's the colored part of your eye that makes your eyes blue or green or brown. And at the very center of the iris is the pupil, where light enters into the eye. There are two small muscles that control how big or small the pupil is, and in that way control how much light enters your eye. In bright situations, those muscles contract and make the pupil smaller. And in low light situations, kind of like right now, those muscles relax and the pupil gets bigger to allow in as much light as possible. Of course, it's not completely dark in this room. There are still some lights around. We have the exit signs and the candles behind me. There's the screens and the different glows from other light sources. The eye is incredible at seeking out sources of light, using any available light to help it see. Studies vary, but most researchers agree that your eyes can see 1 candle's worth of light from anywhere from 1.5 miles to 2 miles away. Just 1 candle's worth. As I said, light enters the eye through the pupil, and then it's focused by the lens and projected onto the back of the eye called the retina. And in the retina, there are 2 different types of cells. There are cones and there are rods. These cells help us to see and interpret the light that enters the eye. Each one of your eyes has roughly 7 million cone cells. Cone cells are really good at seeing in bright situations. They see in color and high definition. Your eyes have 7 million cone cells. They have anywhere from 75 to 150 million rod cells. Rods don't see in color, they see in black and white, and rod cells aren't very good at seeing with high definition, but rod cells excel at seeing in darkness, in low light. And so you might have noticed that even in just the few minutes that I've been talking, your eyes have already begun to adjust. You're already able to see better the people around you. And if we kept the lights off for the entire message, by the end of it, you might even be able to see well enough to walk out without bumping into anyone or anything. We're not going to test that today. But instead, the lights are about to come back on. And so, fair warning, if you want, close your eyes because the lights are coming on in 3, 2, 1. It's bright, isn't it? Yeah. It's good to see your faces. Give me a wave in the back. Let me know you guys are still with me. I debated whether or not to do that at the start of a sermon. It's always dangerous to start a sermon in the dark, early in the morning. You wonder if everybody's just going to fall asleep. So I'm glad you guys are still awake and with us. We're in the middle of a series on the Gospel of John. We're listening closely to the words of Jesus, letting him speak for himself to tell us who he is, and by extension, who we are, to see how is it Jesus is inviting us to follow him faithfully. What response is he inviting us to give? And today we hear Jesus say, I am the light of the world. We said these words together just a few minutes ago. I invite you to read them with me again. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. For many of us, these are familiar words. We hear these words at Christmas and Advent. We hear them during baptisms. You've heard sermons and you've read devotions about how Jesus is like light. And of all the things we could say, all the comparisons we could make between Jesus and light, perhaps this one is the most basic. The light of Jesus enables us to see clearly. The light of Jesus shows us things that we would otherwise miss. And the first thing that Jesus shows us is himself. Because when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, he has a very specific light in mind. He's not simply saying, I'm kind of like light. Think about how light works. Think about what you know about light, and then that will help you understand me. That's not the first thing Jesus is saying here. But instead, he says, I am the light of the world. And the context of where and when Jesus says these words suggests that he has a very specific light in mind. John tells us that Jesus speaks these words during the Feast of Tabernacles, or sometimes called the Feast of Booths. And the Feast of Tabernacles was one of the three main Jewish festivals on their calendar. It commemorated the harvest, but it also looked back and remembered the Israelites' 40-year journey through the wilderness to the Promised Land, a journey in which they were led by God himself with a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night to light their way. The festival lasted 8 days, and on each night of the festival, 4 torches were lit in the temple complex. And so don't think of torch like Indiana Jones just holding a torch. Think of torch like a giant bonfire. These 4 giant bonfires were lit in the temple complex, and the light would bounce and reflect off the limestone walls and light up the entire city. And then the people would come to worship, to sing, to dance, to praise the God who had brought them out of the darkness of slavery and death in Egypt and into the light of the Promised Land. And that's when Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Anyone listening would have immediately thought of all of the other scriptural references to light. In the beginning, how the divine word called light out of darkness on the first day, the glory cloud of God that descended on Sinai and the tabernacle. They would think about that pillar of fire that guided and guarded God's people for 40 years, and the prophecies of Isaiah and Zechariah saying that the Messiah, the promised one to come, would be a light for the nations. They'd been singing psalms, belting out, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" As one commentator puts it in the Bible, and maybe especially in the Old Testament, light is God in action. And Jesus says, I am the light. Jesus, the man from Nazareth. Jesus, the son of Mary and Joseph. Jesus, the untrained, unorthodox rabbi with his ragtag band of disciples, whose brothers and sisters we know, we watched him grow up. This Jesus says, I am the light. Not just any light. I'm that light. The light you've been worshiping and celebrating this entire time. That's me. I'm here. The first thing the light of Jesus shows us is who he is. He is Yahweh God, come down in the flesh to redeem and save his people. And we dare not miss it. Second thing the light of Jesus shows us that we might otherwise miss is shows us ourselves, who we are. It might seem obvious, but one of the problems with darkness is that you can't see clearly or at all. Some of you have had the experience of going on a cave tour where you're deep down in a cave and they turn off all the lights and there is literally no light at all. You cannot see your hand in front of your face, and it doesn't matter how long you wait. Your eyes will never adjust to the complete absence of light. The problem with darkness is we can't see clearly. And the longer you sit in darkness, it starts to become disorienting. You start to lose a sense of where you are spatially. You start to lose a sense of time, of how long it's been, what time of day it is. You can even lose a sense of yourself. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who has a relative who later in life went blind. And this relative now needs medication to help him know when to go to sleep and when to wake up. Because of his blindness, because he is in darkness, he doesn't have all the normal cues that many of us have in terms of when to go to bed, when to get up. It's nighttime, it's daytime. He doesn't have any of that. He's lost his sense of time, sense of place in the day. And so he has medication to help. Darkness makes it so we can't see. Darkness disorients us. We don't know up from down, left from right, good from evil, and so you might think the solution is simple. Just turn on the light. But remember what happened when we turned on the lights here. We've all had that experience of going suddenly from darkness into light. It's painful. It can be blinding. And just as it is with our physical bodies, so too spiritually. Remember the encounters that people have when they're suddenly thrust into the searing light of God. Think of Isaiah in the temple who sees the Lord and says, I'm undone. I'm ruined because my eyes have seen the holiness of God. Think of Peter on the miraculous catch of fish who says, away from me, Lord, away from me, Jesus, because I'm a sinful man. Think of Paul on the road to Damascus who was literally blinded by the light of Jesus. Most of the time when we think about Jesus being light, we think of that as good news, and ultimately it is, but we can't forget that the first experience of people going from darkness into light is often pain. It's blindness. Because in the light of Jesus, nothing remains hidden. Not from him. Not your thoughts. Not the desires of your hearts. Not the words you speak to your family behind closed doors or the grudges that you hold against coworkers and classmates. Not your web browser history or your media consumption. If Jesus is the light, if Jesus is that light, then nothing is hidden from him. He sees all of you. And in the light of Jesus, we see ourselves. All that we are, all that we've done. We see the depth of our sin and the damage it's caused. And who wants to be exposed in that way? No, oftentimes the darkness feels safer, more comfortable. Better not to know, better not to look. It's what the Pharisees did. And they refused to believe Jesus. They refused to believe his testimony about who he was. They refused to see him clearly. And when they refused to see Jesus, they refused to look at themselves, to see that they too were sinful people in need of forgiveness, that they too sat in darkness and needed light. That goes for us as well. How often are you and I blind when we think we see? The light of Jesus shows us who he is. It shows us who we are. And the light of Jesus shows us what to do in the face of darkness. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In the face of darkness, we don't hold back. We don't stay and hide in the shadows. But neither do we charge into it thinking that we can lighten the darkness on our own. Because you know this. The darkness is scary. It's dangerous if you don't have the light. No, when faced with the darkness of our own sin, with the darkness of evil in the world, you and I follow the light. And so you might ask, if the way that we face darkness is by following the light, then where is the light going? Where is Jesus headed? He's going to the cross. Just a few verses after our reading, in this same conversation that continues on with the Pharisees, Jesus says this. He says, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. Jesus is going to the cross. He's going into the darkness. He's going to the cross where we will see him most clearly of all, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus is going to the cross where we will see clearly the awful penalty and cure for our sin. He's going to the cross where the light of the world will be plunged into darkness and yet rise again 3 days later. Because Jesus is the light. that no darkness can overcome. And so when you are faced with the darkness of your sin, when you have anger you can't shake, a habit you can't break, when you see the damage that you've caused and you wonder, how can this ever be right again? Remember, Jesus is the light of the world. And so don't stay in the shadows, but come to the light to be forgiven and healed and made whole again. When you look at the world and you see darkness, when you hear the news or you see it in your social media feed and you think everything's going to hell, the darkness is winning, are we alone in all this? Has God abandoned us? Remember, Jesus is the light of the world. The light that scatters the shadows, that dispels the darkness, and that leads us, leads you in the light of life. And when you're tempted to withdraw from that darkness, to just circle the wagons, leave well enough alone, let those in darkness stay there, remember, Jesus is the light that goes into the darkness, the light that has come into the world. Jesus says, I am the light of the world, but in another place, in another gospel, he says, you are the light of the world. Not that you and I have light in ourselves, but that we reflect the light of Jesus. And the world needs us. The world needs you to be able to see Jesus clearly. Because in a very real way, followers of Jesus are the only ones who see clearly, who see things for what they are, who can see Jesus, who can look at themselves and be honest, who can stare down into the darkness without fear and without flinching. And it's not because you and I are so great, but because Jesus is. Because he is the light. And so Jesus sends his followers, he sends you and me to follow him into the darkness, that we might reflect his light to a dark and a dying world. Jesus is the light. And you and I, we follow him as he leads us by the light of life. Amen.